The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood before an ornate mirror in her dressing room. Today was unlike any other day in her life. The coronation of King Charles III would mark a new chapter in British history, and her family would be at the center of it all. She smoothed down the fabric of her stunning Alexander McQueen gown, the same designer who had created her wedding dress 12 years earlier. William emerged from the adjoining room, adjusting his ceremonial uniform with practiced ease. As the heir to the throne, he carried the weight of tradition on his shoulders, but today he seemed lighter somehow. Perhaps it was the excitement of sharing this momentous occasion with his children, or maybe it was the pride he felt watching his father finally take his rightful place as monarch. "Are you ready for this?" Catherine asked, catching her husband's eye in the mirror. They had been through so much together: royal tours, public scrutiny, the challenges of raising children in the spotlight. But nothing quite compared to a coronation. William smiled, that warm expression that had captivated the world since his youth. "As ready as one can be for something that hasn't happened in 70 years, he replied, straightening his medals. The children seemed more excited than nervous, which is probably a good sign. Down the hallway, 9-year-old Prince George was having his own preparations supervised by his nanny. As second in line to the throne, George understood the significance of the day better than his younger siblings. He had been practicing his bow for weeks, determined to honor his grandfather properly. His small fingers worked carefully on the buttons of his formal attire, a miniature version of his father's ceremonial dress. Princess Charlotte, now 8 years old, was practically bouncing with excitement in her room. She had been looking forward to wearing her special dress for months, a beautiful creation that would complement her mother's outfit perfectly. Her long hair was being carefully styled, and she kept asking her dresser if she could wear the small tiara that had been specially made for the occasion. 5-year-old Prince Louis was perhaps the most unpredictable element of the day. Known for his spirited personality and tendency to steal scenes at public events, his parents had been gently preparing him for the solemnity of the occasion. Yet there was an understanding that Louis would be Louis, and sometimes that brought exactly the kind of authentic joy that people needed to see from their royal family. The palace was buzzing with activity. Staff members moved through the corridors with military precision, ensuring every detail was perfect. Security personnel conducted final checks, while stylists made last-minute adjustments to the family's outfits. The children's tutors had spent weeks explaining the historical significance of coronation ceremonies, helping them understand their roles in this ancient tradition. Catherine remembered her own nervousness before her wedding day, when she had transformed from a commoner into a duchess in the span of a few hours. Today felt different. She was no longer the newcomer learning royal protocol. She had grown into her role as Princess of Wales with grace and confidence, earning the respect of the British people and the wider world. The family gathered in the main sitting room for a final check before departing for Westminster Abbey. Charles, now dressed in his formal robes, looked every inch the king he had waited decades to become. Camilla, elegant in her coronation gown, stood beside him with quiet dignity. The sight of 3 generations of royals together was deeply moving, representing both continuity and change. George stood straighter when he saw his grandfather, practicing the formal bow one more time. Charlotte curtsied perfectly, her face glowing with pride at getting it exactly right. Louis, still young enough to be more interested in the shiny buttons on his outfit than the ceremony ahead, nevertheless understood that today was special. The children had been involved in planning certain aspects of the day, from choosing the music they wanted to hear to selecting which of their favorite charities would benefit from the coronation celebrations. This involvement had helped them feel connected to the event rather than simply being passive participants in an adult ceremony. Catherine knelt down to Louis's level, straightening his collar one final time. "Remember what we practiced," she said gently. "Today we're representing not just our family, but all the people who will be watching and celebrating with us." Louis nodded solemnly, then broke into one of his infectious grins that reminded everyone why the public had fallen in love with him. The drive to Westminster Abbey was carefully choreographed, with crowds lining the streets hours before the royal carriages would pass. Inside their vehicle, the Wales family waved to well-wishers, with Charlotte and Louis pressing their faces to the windows in wonder at the sea of Union Jack flags and cheering people. William pointed out landmarks to his children as they traveled through London, sharing stories about previous coronations and royal ceremonies. He wanted them to understand that they were part of something much larger than themselves, a living history that connected them to generations of monarchs who had served the British people. As Westminster Abbey came into view, its ancient spires reaching toward the cloudy London sky, the magnitude of the moment settled over the family. This was where kings and queens had been crowned for nearly 1,000 years. Today, Charles would join that illustrious line, and his grandchildren would witness history being made. The children fell quiet as they approached the abbey, perhaps finally understanding the weight of what was about to unfold. Catherine reached over and squeezed William's hand, a private moment of connection amid the public spectacle. They had come so far together, from university sweethearts to senior members of the royal family, and today represented another milestone in their remarkable journey. Inside the abbey, guests were already seated according to strict protocol. World leaders, foreign royalty, and representatives from across the Commonwealth had gathered to witness this historic moment. The children would soon take their places among them, representing the future of the monarchy while honoring its past. The anticipation was building, both inside the ancient walls of Westminster Abbey and in homes across Britain and around the world. Millions of people had cleared their schedules to watch this rare and spectacular ceremony, and the Wales family was about to step into the spotlight as never before. As their carriage drew closer to the Abbey's entrance, Catherine felt a familiar mixture of nerves and excitement. This was what royal life was truly about, serving as symbols of continuity and hope while remaining fundamentally human and relatable. Today, her children would learn that lesson in the most public way possible, and she was proud of how prepared they were for the challenge ahead. The great doors of Westminster Abbey opened to reveal a scene of breathtaking magnificence. 2,000 guests rose to their feet as the procession began, their voices joining in the opening hymn that had echoed through these walls for centuries. The Wales family took their designated places in the front rows, the children's eyes wide with wonder at the spectacle unfolding before them. George sat between his parents, his small hands folded neatly in his lap as he had been taught. Despite his young age, he understood the solemnity of the moment and the importance of his behavior. Charlotte was next to her mother, occasionally whispering quiet observations about the beautiful decorations and the magnificent clothes worn by the guests. Louis, true to form, was fascinated by everything around him, his head turning constantly to take in all the sights and sounds. The abbey itself had been transformed into a vision of gold and crimson, with flowers from across the Commonwealth decorating every available surface. The altar glowed with hundreds of candles, their light reflecting off the ancient stones and creating an atmosphere that was both intimate and grand. Television cameras captured every moment, broadcasting the ceremony to an estimated global audience of over 2 billion people. When the moment came for Charles to enter the abbey, a hush fell over the congregation that was almost mystical in its completeness. The children watched in fascination as their grandfather processed down the aisle, accompanied by the most senior members of the clergy and nobility. The weight of 1,000 years of history seemed to settle on his shoulders, yet he walked with dignity and purpose. Catherine kept a careful eye on all 3 children, particularly Louis, who had a tendency to become restless during long ceremonies. She had brought small quiet toys and snacks, hidden discreetly in her purse, should they be needed. But, for now, the children seemed completely absorbed in the pageantry surrounding them. The Archbishop of Canterbury began the ancient ritual with words that had been spoken at coronations for generations. Each element of the ceremony had deep symbolic meaning, from the anointing with holy oil to the presentation of the crown jewels. The children had learned about these traditions in their special lessons, but seeing them performed in person was entirely different from reading about them in books. When the moment came for the anointing, a golden canopy was held over Charles to maintain the privacy of this most sacred part of the ceremony. The oil used was the same blend that had anointed Queen Elizabeth II 70 years earlier, connecting this coronation to all those that had come before. Charlotte whispered to her mother about how beautiful the canopy looked, its golden threads catching the light from the abbey's ancient windows. George watched with particular interest as the orb and scepter were presented to his grandfather. As future king himself, these symbols of royal authority would one day be his responsibility. William had been preparing him gradually for this destiny, explaining the meaning behind the monarchy's traditions while ensuring he still had a normal childhood. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The Archbishop lifted St. Edward's crown, the most sacred of all the crown jewels, and slowly lowered it onto Charles's head. The congregation held its breath as the words, "God save the King," rang out for the first time in over 70 years. Louis clapped his hands together in delight, earning gentle smiles from those around him. The children's reactions were captured by cameras and quickly became one of the most talked about aspects of the entire ceremony. George's serious concentration, Charlotte's obvious joy, and Louis's spontaneous enthusiasm perfectly represented the different ways people across Britain were experiencing this historic moment. Camilla's own coronation as queen consort followed, a ceremony that was both touching and significant. The children watched as she was crowned with Queen Mary's crown, specially modified for the occasion. Catherine had explained to Charlotte how important this moment was, showing how women could hold positions of great responsibility and honor within the royal family. The music throughout the ceremony was extraordinary, with choirs from across the Commonwealth joining the traditional Westminster Abbey choir. The children had learned some of the hymns in their music lessons and joined in where appropriate, their young voices adding to the chorus of celebration that filled the ancient building. During the longer readings and prayers, Catherine noticed Louis beginning to fidget slightly. She quietly offered him a small toy from her purse, which he accepted gratefully while managing to remain relatively quiet. The British public later praised Catherine's mothering skills, noting how she balanced maintaining dignity with meeting her youngest child's needs. Prince William's role in the ceremony was particularly moving, as he knelt before his father to pay homage as the heir to the throne. This moment, watched by his children, represented the passing of generations and the continuation of the monarchy into the future. George watched this exchange with particular attention, perhaps beginning to understand his own future role more clearly. The Abbey's acoustics carried every word clearly to the furthest corners, ensuring that even the youngest guests could follow along with the proceedings. The children had programs specially designed for them, with pictures and simple explanations of each part of the ceremony, helping them understand what was happening at each moment. As the ceremony progressed, the children's behavior became a source of pride for their parents and delight for the watching world. They demonstrated that it was possible to maintain royal dignity while still being authentically childlike. Their occasional whispers to their parents, Charlotte's careful attention to her posture, and Louis's wide-eyed wonder at everything around him created moments of genuine human connection amid the formal pageantry. The international guests were particularly charmed by the children's presence, with many commenting afterward how their natural behavior added warmth to the ancient ceremony. Foreign dignitaries noted how the sight of 3 generations of royals together sent a powerful message about the stability and continuity of the British monarchy. The climax of the religious ceremony came with the final blessing and the singing of the national anthem. 2,000 voices joined together in "God Save the King," with the words taking on fresh meaning after so many decades of singing about the Queen. The children sang along enthusiastically, their clear voices adding to the emotional power of the moment. As the formal ceremony concluded and the procession began to form for the journey back to Buckingham Palace, the children's excitement was barely contained. They had successfully participated in one of the most important ceremonies in British history, and their behavior had been exemplary throughout the long service. The Abbey slowly began to empty as the royal party prepared for the next phase of the celebration. Outside, crowds had been gathering since dawn, eager to catch a glimpse of the newly crowned king and his family. The children would soon experience the overwhelming joy of public celebration as they traveled through the streets of London, but, for now, they basked in the afterglow of having witnessed something truly extraordinary. Their participation in the coronation had been flawless, demonstrating that the future of the monarchy was in capable hands. The sight of William, Catherine, and their 3 children supporting the new king had provided exactly the image of stability and continuity that the nation needed to see on this historic day. The Golden State coach gleamed in the afternoon sunlight as the newly crowned King Charles III and Queen Camilla took their places for the ceremonial procession back to Buckingham Palace. Behind them, in a second magnificent carriage, the Wales family settled in for what would become one of the most memorable journeys of their lives. The children pressed their faces to the windows, amazed by the sea of people that stretched as far as they could see. Charlotte had never witnessed anything quite like the crowd that lined the processional route. Hundreds of thousands of people had traveled from across Britain and around the world to be part of this historic day. Union Jack flags fluttered in every direction, and the sound of cheering was so loud it could be heard even inside the well-insulated royal carriage. She waved enthusiastically, delighted when people in the crowd waved back at her, Prince Louis was absolutely captivated by the spectacle outside their windows. He bounced from one side of the carriage to the other, not wanting to miss a single moment of the celebration. His parents had to gently remind him to stay seated, but they couldn't help smiling at his obvious joy and excitement. The crowd's reaction to seeing him was particularly warm, with many people laughing and pointing when they caught sight of his animated responses. George maintained his composure beautifully throughout the journey, waving politely to the crowds while understanding the dignity required of his position. At 9 years old, he was beginning to grasp the responsibility that came with being second in line to the throne, and his behavior during the procession reflected this growing maturity. Yet he was still young enough to be genuinely thrilled by the overwhelming display of public affection. The processional route had been carefully planned to give maximum numbers of people the opportunity to see the royal family. Starting from Westminster Abbey, the carriages traveled along Parliament Street and Whitehall, past the iconic landmarks that define the heart of British government. The children looked out in wonder at the familiar buildings they had visited many times, now transformed by decorations and surrounded by celebrating crowds. As they passed through Trafalgar Square, the noise from the crowd reached incredible levels. Thousands of people had gathered around Nelson's column, creating a natural amphitheater of celebration. Charlotte pointed excitedly at the decorations that had been hung throughout the square, while Louis clapped his hands in response to the enthusiastic cheering from below. Catherine spent much of the journey helping the children navigate their first major public celebration as senior royals. She quietly reminded them when to wave, helped them understand what the crowds were celebrating, and ensured they were comfortable throughout the long ride. Her own experience of royal processions had taught her how overwhelming these events could be, even for adults. The crowds along the mall were particularly spectacular, with people packed dozens deep on both sides of the wide avenue. Many had been waiting since the early hours of the morning, bringing picnics and camping chairs to make their long wait more comfortable. The sight of families celebrating together created a wonderful atmosphere that the royal children could feel even from inside their carriage. William pointed out various landmarks to his children as they passed, sharing stories about previous royal celebrations and family history. He wanted them to understand that they were part of a living tradition that connected them to generations of royals who had traveled these same routes during their own moments of celebration and ceremony. The children's natural reactions to the crowds became one of the most endearing aspects of the entire procession. Television cameras captured their genuine smiles, Charlotte's careful waves, George's dignified acknowledgments, and Louis's irrepressible enthusiasm. Social media was filled with comments about how authentic and charming the children appeared, representing the modern face of an ancient institution. Street vendors along the route had prepared special coronation merchandise, and the sight of countless people wearing crowns, waving flags, and sporting royal memorabilia added to the festive atmosphere. Charlotte was particularly fascinated by a group of children her own age who were dressed in miniature royal costumes, clearly having prepared for weeks for this special day. The international visitors who had traveled to London specifically for the coronation were amazed by the scale of the public celebration. Many had never seen anything quite like the British public's enthusiasm for royal occasions, and the sight of 3 generations of the royal family processing through the streets provided exactly the kind of spectacle they had hoped to witness. As the procession continued through St. James's Park, the crowds became even more enthusiastic, if that was possible. People had climbed trees and lampposts to get better views, while others watched from the windows of buildings along the route. The children waved to everyone they could see, understanding instinctively that these people had made great efforts to be part of their grandfather's special day. The weather had cooperated perfectly for the celebration, with occasional breaks in the clouds allowing sunshine to illuminate the processional route. This helped create the kind of magical atmosphere that makes royal occasions truly memorable, and the children's enjoyment was enhanced by the beautiful conditions. Police officers along the route were charmed by the children's interactions with the crowd, particularly Louis's animated responses to the cheering. Many officers later reported that the sight of the young royals enjoying themselves so obviously had created an even more positive atmosphere among the celebrating crowds. The carriage horses, magnificently groomed and trained for such occasions, maintained their steady pace despite the incredible noise and excitement surrounding them. The children were fascinated by these beautiful animals, and George asked his father numerous questions about the training required for royal ceremonial duties. As they approached Buckingham Palace, the crowd's excitement reached fever pitch. The palace itself had been decorated with flags and bunting, while the famous balcony where the family would appear had been specially prepared for the traditional post-coronation photographs. The children could see people packed into every available space around the Victoria Memorial and stretching back down the mall. The final stretch of the journey took them through the palace gates, where thousands of people pressed against the railings hoping for one last glimpse of the royal family. The children continued waving until the very last moment, clearly understanding how much their presence meant to the celebrating crowds. Inside the palace courtyard, staff members waited to assist the family with the transition from the public procession to the private moments of celebration that would follow. The children were buzzing with excitement from their ride through London, eager to share their experiences with the family members who had remained at the palace. The success of the procession had exceeded everyone's expectations, with the children's natural charm and enthusiasm adding exactly the right note of joy and authenticity to the formal ceremony. Their ability to connect with the crowds while maintaining royal dignity had demonstrated that the monarchy's future was in excellent hands. As they climbed down from the carriage, the sounds of celebration continued to echo from beyond the palace walls, where thousands of people remained gathered, hoping for the traditional balcony appearance that would conclude the day's public celebrations. The children had successfully completed their first major royal procession, and their parents couldn't have been prouder of their conduct throughout the journey. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was electric with celebration and relief. The coronation ceremony had been flawless, the procession through London had been spectacular, and now came the moment that millions of people around the world had been waiting for, the traditional appearance on the famous balcony. The children rushed through the palace corridors, their excitement barely contained as they prepared for what would become one of the most photographed moments in royal history. Catherine quickly checked each child's appearance, smoothing down Charlotte's dress and adjusting George's ceremonial outfit. The long day had taken its toll on their formal attire, but they still looked magnificent. Louis, despite his energetic participation in the day's events, somehow managed to look as fresh and enthusiastic as he had that morning, his natural charm undiminished by the hours of ceremony and celebration. The palace staff had been preparing for this moment for months. The balcony had been carefully decorated with flowers that would photograph beautifully, while security personnel had positioned themselves strategically to ensure the royal family's safety during their public appearance. Sound engineers had tested the acoustics to ensure that any words spoken from the balcony would carry clearly to the crowds gathered below. King Charles, still wearing his ceremonial robes, took a moment to gather his family around him before they stepped onto the balcony. This was his first opportunity since the coronation to speak privately with his grandchildren about their experiences during the day. He knelt down to their level, his face glowing with pride as he listened to their excited descriptions of everything they had seen and felt. The crowds outside had been growing steadily since the procession arrived at the palace. People who had lined the route had followed the carriages as far as they could, joining the thousands who had staked out positions around the Victoria Memorial hours earlier. The noise from the crowd was clearly audible even inside the palace, a constant reminder of the celebration taking place just beyond the walls. Charlotte had been looking forward to the balcony appearance all day, having seen photographs from previous royal celebrations showing her great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, waving from this same spot. She understood that she was about to become part of that same tradition, and the responsibility made her stand a little straighter as she prepared to step outside. George had been briefed extensively about balcony protocol, learning exactly where to stand and how to wave in a way that would allow the photographers to capture the best images for history. Despite his young age, he took these responsibilities seriously, understanding that the photographs taken today would be looked at for generations to come. The moment finally arrived. Palace doors opened onto the balcony, and the roar from the crowd below was overwhelming. Tens of thousands of people packed every available space, their faces turned upward toward the palace, flags waving frantically in a sea of red, white, and blue. The children had never experienced anything quite like this level of public enthusiasm and excitement. King Charles stepped forward first, raising his hand in acknowledgement of the crowd's cheers. The sight of the newly crowned monarch on the balcony for the first time sent the crowd into even greater celebration, with cheers that could be heard for miles around central London. Queen Camilla joined him, elegant and dignified in her coronation gown, completing the image that would define this historic day. William and Catherine emerged next, their children arranged carefully between them. The sight of 3 generations of royals together on the balcony created exactly the image of continuity and stability that the monarchy needed to project. The children waved enthusiastically, their natural joy and excitement translating perfectly to the cameras and crowds below. Louis immediately became the star of the balcony appearance, his uninhibited delight in the crowd's reaction making him irresistible to photographers and television cameras. He waved with both hands, pointed excitedly at different sections of the crowd, and at one point appeared to be trying to count all the people he could see. His authentic reactions provided exactly the kind of human moment that made the formal occasion feel accessible and real. Charlotte waved with practiced royal grace, having clearly paid attention during her etiquette lessons. Her smile was radiant as she looked out at the sea of celebrating people, many of whom were waving specifically at her. She had worn a small tiara for the occasion, and the sight of the young princess in her beautiful dress created a fairy tale image that would be reproduced in newspapers and magazines around the world. The crowd's reaction to seeing the children was extraordinary. Chants of their names rose from different sections of the gathered masses, while parents lifted their own children onto their shoulders so they could get better views of the young royals. The generational connection was obvious and touching, representing the hope and continuity that the monarchy symbolized for many British families. George maintained his composure beautifully, waving steadily and acknowledging different sections of the crowd with the kind of presence that suggested natural leadership qualities. At just 9 years old, he was already demonstrating the kind of dignity and responsibility that would serve him well in his future role as king. The photographer's position below captured thousands of images during the relatively brief balcony appearance. Every expression, every wave, every interaction between family members was documented for posterity. The children seemed completely comfortable with this level of attention, having grown up understanding that public interest in their family was simply part of their lives. Television commentators around the world provided running commentary on the children's behavior and appearance, with many noting how natural and confident they appeared despite their young ages. International audiences were particularly charmed by the family dynamics visible on the balcony, with William and Catherine clearly proud of their children's conduct throughout the long day. The traditional Royal Air Force flyover provided the spectacular climax to the balcony appearance. As the sound of aircraft engines grew louder, the children looked up excitedly, shielding their eyes from the sun as they searched the sky. When the red arrows appeared in perfect formation, trailing smoke in the colors of the Union Jack, Louis clapped his hands in delight, while Charlotte and George watched in amazement. The timing of the flyover was perfect, creating a moment of shared excitement that united the royal family with the crowds below. Everyone looked skyward together, sharing in the spectacle that represented British excellence and tradition. The children's genuine excitement at the aircraft display provided yet another authentic moment that endeared them even further to the watching public. As the aircraft disappeared over central London, the family took their final bows to the crowd below. The children had clearly enjoyed every moment of their public appearance, and their enthusiasm had been infectious. The sight of them waving goodbye created a poignant end to what had been an extraordinary day of celebration and ceremony. The balcony appearance had lasted just long enough to satisfy the crowd's enthusiasm without overwhelming the children. As they stepped back through the palace doors, the sounds of continued celebration could still be heard from the streets outside. The public had gotten exactly what they had hoped for, a glimpse of their royal family at their most authentic and appealing. Inside the palace, the children were immediately surrounded by family members eager to hear about their experiences throughout the day. Their successful participation in such a significant historical event had exceeded everyone's expectations, and their natural charm and dignity had provided perfect support for the newly crowned king. The images captured during the balcony appearance would be reproduced countless times in the days and weeks that followed, becoming defining photographs of the coronation and establishing the children as popular figures in their own right. Their ability to balance royal protocol with authentic childhood joy had created exactly the kind of positive public image that would serve the monarchy well in the years to come. As evening approached and the public celebrations continued throughout London, the royal family could reflect on a day that had been both historically significant and personally meaningful. The children had played their part perfectly, helping to ensure that King Charles III's coronation would be remembered not just as a moment of constitutional importance, but As a joyful celebration that brought the nation together, as the sun began to set over London, the Wales family finally had their first private moments since the early morning preparations. The children were exhausted, but exhilarated, their day having exceeded even their most exciting expectations. In the comfortable family quarters of Buckingham Palace, away from the cameras and crowds, they could finally process everything they had experienced during this historic day. Charlotte immediately wanted to tell her parents about every single person she had seen in the crowds, every flag she had noticed, and every moment that had made her feel special throughout the day. Her enthusiasm was infectious as she described the beautiful decorations in Westminster Abbey, the magnificent horses during the procession, and the incredible noise from the crowds during their balcony appearance. Louis, despite his young age, seemed to understand that he had been part of something truly extraordinary. He kept asking when they could do it again, not quite grasping that coronations were once-in-a-lifetime events. His parents gently explained that his grandfather had waited over 70 years for this day, helping him understand just how special and rare the ceremony had been. George was more thoughtful in his reflections, asking serious questions about the meaning behind different parts of the ceremony and what it meant for his grandfather to be king. His parents were struck by how much he had absorbed during the day, and how naturally he had handled the responsibility of representing the future of the monarchy at such a young age. The family's evening meal was a relaxed affair, with extended royal family members sharing stories from their different perspectives on the day's events. The children were fascinated to hear how the ceremony had looked from other viewpoints, and how their own behavior had been received by both the crowds and the watching world. Television coverage of the coronation continued throughout the evening, with news programs and documentaries analyzing every aspect of the day's events. The children were amazed to see themselves on television, watching their own reactions and behavior from the perspective of the millions of people who had shared in the celebration from their homes around the world. International reaction to the coronation had been overwhelmingly positive, with particular praise for the way the royal children had conducted themselves throughout the long day. Their natural charm and obvious enjoyment had helped create exactly the kind of positive image that strengthened the monarchy's relationship with both the British public and the international community. Catherine reflected on how much her children had grown during just this one day. They had handled enormous public pressure with grace and dignity while maintaining their authentic personalities. The balance between royal protocol and natural childhood behavior that they had achieved was exactly what the modern monarchy needed to remain relevant and beloved. William felt immense pride in his family's performance throughout the coronation celebrations. His children had represented the future of the monarchy perfectly, demonstrating that the institution could evolve and modernize while maintaining its essential dignity and importance. Their success gave him confidence about the monarchy's future under their eventual leadership. The children's tutors and staff members were already planning lessons that would help them understand and remember their role in this historic event. The coronation would become part of their personal history and education, helping them understand their place in the long tradition of British monarchy and their responsibilities to the people they would one day serve. Social media had been filled throughout the day with positive comments about the children's behavior and appearance. Parents across Britain and around the world had commented on how well-behaved and charming they had been, with many noting that they represented exactly the kind of role models that young people needed to see in public life. The economic impact of the coronation had been enormous, with tourism, merchandising, and media coverage generating significant revenue for Britain. The children's popularity had contributed substantially to this success, with items featuring their images or celebrating their participation in the ceremony, proving particularly popular with both British and international visitors. As the evening progressed, the children began to wind down from their exciting day. Bath time was filled with continued chatter about their experiences, and bedtime stories focused on tales of previous coronations and royal ceremonies. They fell asleep easily, exhausted by the physical and emotional demands of their first major royal event. The images captured throughout the day would become treasured family photographs, documenting not just a historic moment in British history, but also a special day in the children's personal development. Their parents knew that they would look back on these pictures for the rest of their lives, remembering the day they helped their grandfather become king. Historians were already noting that the children's participation in the coronation had created a new model for how young royals could be involved in state occasions. Their natural behavior and obvious enjoyment had made the ancient ceremony feel fresh and relevant, helping to secure public support for the monarchy well into the future. The success of the day had implications far beyond the immediate celebration. The children's popularity and the positive reaction to their participation suggested that the monarchy would continue to enjoy strong public support as it transitioned into its next generation. Their ability to connect with people of all ages had demonstrated that the royal family remained an important and valued part of British life. Late that evening, as the palace finally quieted and the sounds of continued celebration in central London grew softer, King Charles took a moment to thank his son and daughter-in-law for the way they had prepared and supported their children throughout the day. The children's success had been a perfect gift to mark the beginning of his reign. The coronation had achieved everything that its organizers had hoped for and more. It had been a spectacular celebration of British history and tradition, a demonstration of the monarchy's continued relevance and popularity, and a joyful family occasion that had brought the nation together in celebration. For the Wales children, the day had been an introduction to their future roles as senior members of the royal family. They had handled their responsibilities beautifully while remaining authentically themselves, creating exactly the right balance for the modern monarchy. As the day finally came to an end, William and Catherine tucked their children into bed with a sense of accomplishment and pride that would last a lifetime. Their family had not just witnessed history being made. They had played an essential part in creating a new chapter in the story of the British monarchy. The coronation would be remembered as the day King Charles III took his rightful place on the throne, but it would equally be remembered as the day his grandchildren captured the hearts of the nation and the world. Their natural charm, dignity, and joy had provided exactly the image of hope and continuity that the monarchy needed as it moved confidently into the future. The legacy of their participation would extend far beyond this single day, influencing how the royal family engaged with the public for years to come. They had proven that it was possible to honor tradition while embracing modernity, and their success had ensured that the British monarchy would continue to thrive and evolve with the changing times.